Putting together an AI attack is becoming increasingly cheaper, more cost-effective, and thus more profitable.
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE brings together some of the leading minds in artificial intelligence to banter through the ever-packed week's news. On this week's episode, we've got Kush Varshney, IBM Fellow, Nathalie Baracaldo, Senior Research Scientist and Master Inventor, and Mihai Criveti, Distinguished Engineer, Chief Architect, Watson X Orchestrate. Welcome to you all, and Nathalie, welcome back to the show. I know it's been a minute. We're going to cover 4 big stories today. We're going to talk a little bit about Claude Opus 5. We'll talk a little bit about this interesting story by David Zax on what an AI might look like. And finally, there's a bunch of chatter online about Midjourney acquiring CoStar. But first, I want to start because it is the annual release of the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report. There's a bunch to go into here, but Nathalie, one of the reasons we're having you on the show is basically that you're well positioned to talk about it. What caught your eye in this year's report?
Well, a couple of things. The report was really interested and covered the entire cybersecurity space for those of you that are not familiar. So they analyzed from ransomware, a little bit of other types of attacks that happen when you don't have your data encrypted. But what was really special is that it was dominated by AI. So I think this was the very first report where every single section had mentioned in some form or another AI. And what is really interesting is that people are starting really to utilize AI for threat hunting. But there's not a lot of investment in the side of prevention. And that is, I think, very interesting. They also survey everybody to see if they are planning to increase the amount of money they are going to spend in the future to prevent vulnerabilities. And it turns out that prior to those new models that are basically frontier and are helping find vulnerabilities, people had a bit of less intention to invest in cybersecurity. And now, with this huge news and this increasing capability, what we're really seeing is an increase on the investment intention. And so hopefully it would not only go to threat hunting, but also to prevention, because at the end of the day, that's the root. There's a lot of
Yeah, that's a good sign. I mean, I think it takes a while to catch up, it seems like.
So the increase that we saw was from 64% to 85% investment. So that's substantial amount of money that people are thinking on increase their investments. Another interesting thing, and this is because I have been working so much in AI safety and security, is that when they evaluate AI vulnerabilities, we have the following very top 2 vulnerabilities. One is inversion, where model inversion, for those of you that are not really familiar with that, it's the fact when a model or an attacker tries to use a model to get to the training data. And so this was around $6.7 million incidents. And that's a lot of money. When I was starting to work in AI privacy and we were kind of thinking about this threat, it seemed like a super far away situation. And now we're seeing $6 million figure to one of these attacks. The second type of attack that we saw was prompt injection. And that was for 5.89. And basically, what it does is prompt injection is people manipulate or adversaries manipulate the prompts to trick the model. And because these models are really stochastic, they tend to kind of change their answer and do nefarious things, especially when we have multi-agent. So those, I guess, were some of the highlights. Does anything like that I mentioned ring a bell or seems interesting?
Yeah, no, I think it's all really interesting. I mean, I think, Mihai, one of the questions that I had is, I think it's not just AI is dominating, the attack surface here, but it also kind of feels like the nature of the security threats that AI is presenting is itself changing as well. I think just a little bit, there's a lot of discussion about, this sort of AES vulnerability that got discovered, it seems like almost the discourse is moving from, well, AI, it just does the same old attacks, but better, like faster, to like actually creating novel classes of problem that we need to deal with. Is that where you see things going?
I see it as an economic problem, as an economic challenge. I think AI is creating a asymmetric cost structure where putting together an AI attack is becoming increasingly cheaper, more cost effective, and thus more profitable. Attackers don't need to have the best hackers. They just need to have a model without the right guardrails in place. And they only need to succeed once, while defenders need to hire the best practitioners, more practitioners, and they need to use the best models with no guardrails. And we've even seen this recently in the, I would say, incident between OpenAI and Hugging Face. When there was an attack on their infrastructure, they couldn't use a frontier model from the established vendors. They had to go to, I think it was Kimi K3 or something like that, because it didn't have guardrails to help them patch their infrastructure. So while attackers only need to have one model, which doesn't have guardrails, that they can use in an effective way, defenders are stuck behind, corporate approved spend and cost and guardrails and models which keep degrading you because they think you are the attacker. So to me, it almost seems like tokenomics and guardrails are affecting defenders more than they are attackers.
Kush, this report in some ways is making me a little bit nervous. I think Nathalie, like last year, it was a little bit like, well, we weren't investing in security. And now it seems like we are investing more and more in security. But the question is almost like, to Mihai's point, like, can we invest fast enough? If you had to predict, I guess, for a cost of a data breach 2027, do you think those costs are going to be going up over time? Or what is the kind of overstate of play, you think, in terms of where this is all going?
Yeah, I think Mihai posed it very well in terms of the economics of it. So I think the investment on the defender side needs to keep increasing, but also in a particular way, which is that the open weight model sort of way. And I think this week, so that was last week's news, right? That OpenAI Hugging Face sort of thing. And this week, it's all been about the open weight versus closed weight. And everyone's kind of using the same evidence. And some people are saying, oh, this is evidence that, yes, we should do more open weight models. And then there's these other people saying, this is what happened.
No, it's about closed weight models.
Exactly, right? So like when it's all about, the same exact incident or, whatever, and both sides are taking this as proof that, oh, we need to go this way or that way, I think it stops being a technical sort of problem. It's really a business problem. What's the business model? How are things going to play out economically, as Mihai said?
Yeah, and I think the Hugging Face example, if we can just sit on it for a moment, is really strange in some ways. Because I guess, Mihai, the way you put it was, well, if you're going to pull this off, you don't need hackers anymore. You just need a good enough model. The Hugging Face example, it almost suggests that you may not even be an attacker intentionally, and you might create, all of this unintentional hacking activity. I guess, Nathalie, what do you think? Is this is that really like an edge case? We're not going to see sort of people running cyber evals causing, AIs to run out of the lab and attack people. It almost feels like there's going to be traditional malicious actors that are motivated by, say, money, right, and economics of it. And then I wonder if there's going to be a whole class of attack, which is just like unintentional agents running around. I don't know, Natalie, what do you think?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to it. The first part is there are always going to be adversaries. We know this for sure. Just the report that we were discussing, 55% of the incidents reported were from attackers, malicious actors. Now, an interesting aspect of using AI and using these large language models is that they are subject to what we call reward hacking. And that's exactly what happened in Hugging Face. So in their situation, OpenAI was trying to basically run a test bed of things, and then the model decided it really, really, really needed to complete the list. And so, Hugging Face seems to have the key answers. Let's just go and get them. Reward hacking, it did get the answers, but not the way the evaluators were intending. And so if you think about our normal agents in our everyday operations, they are given things that are or tasks that are really beneficial, but there is always a chance to have something that goes wrong just because the models are stochastic. And now, to me, what this highlights is the necessity, and also in that report that we're discussing, the necessity to just cover the gaps that companies have would actually reduce the amount of successful incidents once we have agents. Because, for example, if people have encrypted data, the agent is less likely, even if it's under a reward hacking situation, to get that data out and exfiltrate the data, for example. If we don't have like the basic identity management and so forth, we're not going to be able to cover that sort of use case. Or right now, it's kind of a use case because we need to treat these agents as a first-class citizen right now. And I think surrounding them with guardrails, not only from the machine learning perspective, but having identity management, proper access control, and so forth, encryption and rest, and it's going to be incredibly important to really reduce the number of incidents.
Well, we'll definitely check in on the cost of a data breach 2027. Maybe we'll go around and do a quick vote. I mean, I guess if you had to guess for 2027 if the cost of a data breach is going to be higher or lower, I'm kind of curious about what you think. I guess, Kush, do you want to make a prediction first?
I think the cost of doing the breach will be lower, but the cost incurred by having the breach will be higher.
A nuanced and good answer. Mihai, I guess you're agreed as well.
I agree with that, yeah.
And Natalie as well.
Yes,
right.
I don't think there's another option.
Yeah, exactly. Well, your predictions are logged. We'll check in next year and see where everybody's at. Well, great. I'm going to pull into our next topic of the day. After all of the stress and drama and conversation about Fable 5, Claude Opus 5 is out. And in some ways, I feel like this might be the bigger story, is kind of my prediction, is, it turns out that Fable is a really expensive model to use. And so in some ways, it may turn out that the release of Sonnet is a much bigger deal. And so I guess maybe, Mihai, I'll turn it to you. Anything new that you're seeing in this release? Is this more of the same? This is always the question, is kind of like, are we just having another model release? Are the benchmarks just state of the art again? Curious about what you point our listeners to.
I think I'm on the record on Mixture of Experts saying almost every single time I love Claude Code and I love Opus as my model. I've kind of shifted from that opinion between Opus 4.7 and 4.8. I didn't like them as much as I liked the models from OpenAI, especially as those harnesses evolved. I think with Fable, I've seen a return to the glory days of Anthropic. Fable is an amazing model. I love it. It's extremely effective at what it does. It follows instructions very well. And the only time it doesn't do what I want is when it finds a bug, it tries to fix it and goes, "Ooh, you've been downgraded to Opus. I believe you're trying to hack something." It's like, no, that's a bug you found. You're trying to fix it. So the guardrails did get in the way, but that was a great model. I did find an interesting bug when I was using Fable, which was that it was telling you the cost of inference, even on a max subscription. So within 2 hours, that number shot up to about $5,000 for me. And I was like, okay, are you guys going to bill me? What's going on here? Right? Turns out it was a bug, but it kind of scared me because I boiled it down to about, $100 a question. What is your question on this large code base? So it was a very effective model. It was a great model, but an expensive model. With Opus 5, I think the intent was to give you similar capabilities, but at a much lower cost. I haven't seen it. So in my experience, Opus 5 performs worse than 4.8 for me. It's ignoring my instructions. It's ignoring my agent's MD. It's contradicting itself. And if I ask it 5 times in a row, go fix this issue, it's going to try to fix it. It says it's fixed. I say, go fix it. It's going to find 5 more bugs, 5 more bugs, 5 more bugs. I didn't have the same experience that I'm getting out of Fable. So I think while the model might be okay, the harness, the prompts, Claude Code itself haven't yet caught up, or maybe the prompting techniques haven't yet caught up to be able to use Opus 5 just as effectively as I was using 4.8 or as people are using Fable. So right now I'm still spending the vast majority of my tokens on that weekly allowance of Fable.
Yeah, the kind of adjustments I think that people are going to make are pretty interesting here, particularly just because like Fable is so intense in terms of usage and cost. There's a couple ways we can go, but maybe Kush, first we can kind of maybe touch on like Mihai's point about sort of the security aspects of this. I have a couple of friends who work in biosecurity, and they're like, I can't use any Anthropic product for anything because even if you mention like what is DNA, sometimes you'll get freaked out and shut you down. Um, I wonder, I guess maybe Kush, the question just to turn into a question is whether or not you think Anthropic will be able to kind of sustain those types of restrictions for long on their products, because it feels like the pressure to use it for completely non-threatening, innocuous cases is so great that like eventually they're going to have to let up a little bit on their security classifiers. But I don't know how you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's actually more of a system level thing. So Mihai was just mentioning this, right? There's the harness around it and the model, and both have to work in concert with each other. And many of these sort of guardrail things are getting triggered at the harness level. So it's the model, but also the harness together. And yeah, I think both can be updated. I think understanding the user, their intent, is something that needs to happen a bit more. And maybe that doesn't happen at the model level, but at the wrapper around the model. So I think we'll see things. I mean, eventually things have to be more like personalized to you, to your needs. And I think we'll get there in some fashion.
Yeah, I was thinking one of the main focus I have currently is actually policy-driven approaches for AI. And your question, Tim, seems very related to that in that your friend probably has a legitimate use case where
Yeah.
the policy
As
of
far as I know.
usage
Yeah.
we'll believe that for the time being.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
And so the idea of having a very tailored policy means that now we have applications that may require slightly different alignment. And so I think as we progress in the usage of this model, we are going to head to a point where every legitimate application should have their own policy of what's acceptable and unacceptable, basically. And because we answer and the model is tailored to that particular policy that you define, in which case talking about DNA is okay. We are just working on this. This is our company that does this XYZ. So we should have a policy that is tailored to that. And so I think it's goes back to those do we have open source models that potentially would allow you to use really your own policy if you deploy it correctly. That would be a much more flexible approach than having a generic policy for everybody. I think that, to me personally, boils down to that.
Yeah, and also I think tying it to the project itself. Like I started a project with Claude, with Fable. Fable worked on it for half of my token limit. At some point, it discovered some bugs. It tried to fix the bugs and hit the guardrails. Ooh, looks like you're trying to hack yourself. I'm going to downgrade you to Opus. Like, where's the logic in that? Shouldn't it be aware that this was a project that I've built locally? It's trying to do penetration testing against the project itself to harden it or to improve its security posture. And it keeps downgrading me back to Opus. And now I've got anxiety. If I ask it to go fix the security issue, will it downgrade further? Will they lock me out of my Anthropic account? What's going to happen? Right? And I think it's that level of maybe identifying permitted use cases for projects that have been started or are running locally, that there is clearly no malicious intent, need to be made available to defenders. Because otherwise we're going to have hundreds of thousands of software projects that were written with AI that have never been security hardened because you're not allowed to use the powerful models, while the attackers are still going to use, other models without those guardrails to generate attacks.
Yeah, no, there was just a reaction to both what Nathalie and Mihai just said, right? So I think there's the policy itself, which can be customized, but it's also the threshold at which things get triggered, right? So just by setting thresholds appropriately, you can go into more of a precautionary sort of mode, more of a dauntless sort of mode. And I think even just that little bit of control can make a huge difference. So you can have more hallucinations by nature of setting thresholds properly or not, and kind of like trigger things, not trigger them. So it doesn't even have to be very complicated. It can just be like in the harness, like one little ability to have one slider. So yeah.
Yeah, Chris, the question I had for you is a little bit broader, on this kind of paradigm where, I wonder if whether or not the days of you being able to explicitly select your model is only going to be like a temporary thing. Because I feel like safety aside, right? Obviously, Anthropic's like, well, safety, that's right. We're not going to give you the fancy model. But I can imagine a future where, a frontier model company basically says, well, we just want to save costs for you. We want to we want the product to be as efficient for you as possible. So in a kind of non-transparent way, we're going to switch the models depending on what you think the problem is. On one hand, I think the argument is, well, that is more efficient. That's actually the better way of doing it. On the other hand, as someone who loves that little slider and can be like, we're going to ultra code mode or whatever, it feels like they're taking a little bit of kind of my agency away in doing that. And so just wanted to ask you, as someone who kind of thinks about sort of the ethics of these technologies, if you think one paradigm is going to win over the other.
Yeah, I mean, I've never driven a stick shift car, and I'm happy with automatic.
You feel okay
right?
with that.
Yeah, no, sometimes like for most users, it's perfectly fine to have that hidden away, and yeah, there's going to be power users that do want that extra control. I mean, if you're like that race car driver, whatever sort of thing, but yeah, I think for the general public, it's the right thing to do is to kind of capture that into some automatic orchestrator sort of thing. So yeah, that's where we are headed. And it's not just the cost to the user, it's the cost to the planet, and it's the cost to the provider. I mean, like in all respects, it's good to try to get that right balance.
It's a great response. I'll have to bring up that stick shift example. It's a really good one. Mihai, it looks like you might have one final comment on this one.
How do you know that's not already happening? You just don't know about it.
Now you're making me a
maybe
little paranoid.
They are
yeah, it's true.
degrading
it's true.
your model to a different model. Maybe the performance changes. Maybe models are composite models behind the scenes. As long as models are hidden behind a proprietary API, you really have no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mihai making me a little bit paranoid as we move to the next topic. So the next story I want to cover was a really nice blog post that came out from David Zax on the IBM blog entitled, "What Does AI Look Like?" And this is actually a really fun piece because it's all about kind of trying to explain what's going on when AI does what AI does. And I actually wanted to kind of put this in a little bit of a historical perspective. I remember the day when asked, by a reporter or something like, how does AI work? You'd be like, no one really knows. It's like a mysterious thing. And then eventually I think the story became like, oh, well, it's like pattern matching, or it's like, token prediction. It's just the next word, that's kind of how. But even then, I think, both of these approaches were a little bad, right? Like the black box approach, people were like, I don't even know what to make of that. It's like, no one knows how it works. On the other hand, just mere token prediction probably gave people too much of a kind of pessimistic sort of view of the technology, because it turns out that token prediction really could do quite a lot. And obviously, the technology is pretty far from just token prediction nowadays. I guess I want to start. I'm curious, Nathalie, what you thought of the blog post, but also, I think when you get questions from families and friends being like, so what's actually going on, like when an LLM is, when I'm chatting with a chatbot, I'm curious about how you explain it. Like what's the kind of easy to understand layman's terms? Because I feel like everybody's come up with their own story.
Yeah, so I actually do have one slide where I have the example of it's raining cats and then the LLM predicts something like lamps, which is not correct. So you kind of have to iterate, and we have an optimization process until like it's raining cats and salt. Not really, not that. Until basically all the parameters and the optimization lands on it rains to cats and dogs. And then like the LLM gets this price. and that's how it learns. Now imagine the amount of data that we actually are feeding to these systems. It's basically like training them in superpowers with all the data sets that we have out there, curated, because a lot of people think it's just data from the internet randomly, but there's a lot of curation process that goes before we actually train these models. So to me, it's like we are training our models, and these LLMs are just finding patterns. So before even they were called LLMs, we were trying to understand each of the components and how they were learning. There's a lot of things related to mechanistic interpretability that Kush probably can tell us a lot about. But basically, we have been poking these little models that are no longer that little and finding patterns in things like activations and try to modify the activations. And I think it's just as the models grow bigger and bigger, it becomes a little bit more difficult to use some of these techniques because the parameters are just too large. So to me, there's not really magic behind, and it has never felt like we don't fully understand. We kind of have certain senses, like some sense of what's happening, and some parts lighten up more than others just because those were the patterns that were learned based on all the documents. So I'm amazed. The other day I was thinking about this. Like 10 years back, I had this paper on activation steering for very tiny data sets. And then zoom up to today, we're also still doing activation steering to, for example, prevent sycophantic behavior. Very different models. The thing is still is working. So I don't fully believe it's black box. And that's also part of the reason it's very beneficial to have your model there and be able to inspect it as the inferences take place. So that's a super long answer.
That's great. Yeah, no. I mean, I feel like everybody's kind of got their own way, like to kind of go through all the steps. Kush, I know you were interviewed for this article, and so yeah, same question in some ways, like kind of how do you think about explaining some of this stuff? But it sounds like you worked with them quite a bit on like how to kind of give a kind of user-friendly explanation.
Yeah, no, David has done a really good job in this article. And I think the ambition, I wouldn't call it a blog post. I mean, it truly is a masterpiece in a way. And I think the ambition that David had was to, just like Carl Sagan did Cosmos and stuff, like appeal to my parents' generation, to my kids' generation, and to my generation, in the sense that it's really describing what the inner workings are in a way that people can relate to. And he uses spreadsheets, dictionaries, all these sort of things that we've interacted with to make this concept clear, and growing things, all of that sort of stuff. And the thing that I like is that, it's like very relatable. And then the other thing that I kind of wanted to point out is that it's interesting that he goes and like tries to make things like less magical in a sense by appealing to this like ordered, structured sort of way of looking at things. But in fact, the technology itself is not that the emergent behavior of it, the complexity of it goes beyond that, the structure of those kind of the spreadsheets inside, as he says. So it's kind of like balancing what we're comfortable with to say, yes, it's something we know and we can control and we can do well, but there's also like the wildness to it that is true, but it's like kind of not in the way it's put together. So it's like all sorts of balances that he puts in.
Yeah, one of the things I love is basically like kind of the explanation of like, imagine like lots and lots of spreadsheets. In some ways it's like this great way of sort of like making it as kind of near down to earth as possible. Maybe a final question for you on this is, after all this explanation, do you think sort of future generations will sort of say like, actually, neural nets are not that mysterious. Like we will kind of like ultimately crack a lot of these interpretability problems. We really, really understand the emergent, parts of this. And so, at the end of the day, this is just technology we're still figuring out, but we will eventually crack it? Or do you think like there actually is some complexity here that is just like will be persistently weird and difficult?
I think the whole history of computing is basically the history of abstraction. And if you look at the way we used to program computers, binary and assembly language, and then, higher level languages with compilers, things like C, for example, and then interpreted languages like Python and Java. And then we have frameworks and libraries on top. And even when it comes to managing servers, you used to, SSH into a machine and telnet and write commands one by one, and you'd script things. And now you describe the environment and end state you want in a declarative language like, DCL, like Terraform. So everything is building upon abstraction, upon abstraction, upon abstraction. You don't need to understand the layer below to be very effective at what you do above. So I think new generations of software developers are just going to use, higher level abstractions, language, description, architectures, as opposed to code, to describe what they're trying to achieve, the intent, the outcome, as opposed to the steps in how to perform that work. So I think from the perspective, we'll be fine. There will still be a number of individuals that need to understand the complexity of individual bits and bobs and parts to optimize them. But now with AI, that is becoming increasingly more and more outsourced to the point where you're going to have AI writing AI. Not sure if that's a good thing, as we are outsourcing a lot of our thinking. But I think in terms of newer generations, I don't have a concern, right? They will just adopt this new level of abstraction where they describe the goal they want to achieve as opposed to the steps that need to be taken.
Well, I highly recommend it. So it's on the IBM blog. It's called "What Does AI Look Like" by David Zax. And Kush is right. I mean, I'm sort of underselling it by calling it a blog post. It's just actually it's almost quite literary in its quality. So I would highly recommend everybody here check it out. Well, great. I think final story today I want to end on was just a little kind of fun thing that passed my social media feed. Midjourney, most known for its kind of AI art and sort of generated art apps, announced this very interesting acquisition where they acquired an app called CoStar, which is not really an AI app so much as an astrology app. And that, in fact, the sort of CEO of that company is now going to serve as the chief design officer at Midjourney. This comes on the back of Midjourney also talking about the fact that they were, working on a full body scanner, like a kind of an MRI style device. So there's lots of strange, kind of odd things going on at Midjourney. And I guess, Natalie, I'll start with you. If you were the CEO of Midjourney, why buy an astrology app?
If they have a good user base, it's a head start. Then you have I guess that's my only thing. The other thing is if you read the blog post of the hired person, she goes ahead and talks about the great relationship. And I feel strongly that working with people you like, it's very important because it makes things easier if you're aligned on what things you think are important and so forth. So I think there's the component of there may be a good user base. I had not heard about that type of app before, but some people may be using it, and it may have a very interesting, appealing. I don't know if anyone here has tried that app before. Anyone?
I downloaded and tried it, actually. So I was just like, yeah. And I was like, there is AI application here. I feel like in some ways people, for astrology, they want the story, right? And so, the idea of AI as a storyteller in that space is potentially pretty interesting. I guess, Mihai, I'll turn to you because I don't know if you'll make it into the edit, but I saw you give a big shrug when I was introducing this story. Are you baffled, or do you feel like there's some n-dimensional chess going on here?
I think it's a brilliant move.
Okay.
I mean, I can't think of a better user base when it comes to not objecting to hallucinations, not objecting to content which is inaccurate. So from that perspective, I think it's a brilliant move. All joking aside, I'm sure there's a business reason for it. Right. And I'm sure that AI can help generate very creative fictional stories and other kind of things. But that's the only thing I'll say.
Great. Kush, the final word is to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when I first saw it on our roster of stories, I was like, is this a jump the shark moment, a pets.com moment or whatever? But Yeah, as I was actually digging in, I think there is a business case, and this is my understanding, my version of it. So astrology app gets you into a kind of a ritual. It's a rhythm, like you're checking every morning, you're making it part of your daily life. And I think that's what AI doesn't have yet in most cases, right? So when you go to one of these chatbots or coding agents, it's something that you're doing actively separately from your own sort of life. And so I think the plan maybe is to kind of make AI more of this extended mind sort of thing. So it's like with you all the time, it's frictionless and so forth. And I think that's where they must be heading. And this collaborator of mine, Mariana Ganapini, she talks about system zero as like the thing that AI will do for us. And it'll become like just us with that extension. And I think the design, the app, all of that gets us there. And the risk is, though, yeah, I mean, like when it's too much of an extended mind, yeah, I mean, it can kind of colonize our minds, that sort of thing. But maybe that's what their goal is.
This is a much more optimistic view on this story than I had really assumed. But that's what you come here for at a Mixture of Experts, is the unexpected take. And that's all the time that we have for today. So Kush, Mihai, Nathalie, thanks for joining us on the show. Great to have you as always. And Nathalie, hopefully we'll have you soon. And thanks to all you listeners. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we'll see you all next week on Mixture of Experts. So this is a bittersweet episode of Mixture of Experts because our longtime producer, Alex, will be moving teams here at IBM. And so, Alex, we just want to thank you. And we've had a couple people record a goodbye message to you. We'll miss you a lot and best of luck.
Good luck with the new role. I'm looking forward to seeing how you get on with that. And thanks again.
Thank you for the amazing work producing Mixture of Experts. Great work and all the best in your next role.
Happy birthday, Alex! Oh wait, it's not a happy birthday. Oh, you're leaving. Bye!
And thanks for having me on Mixture of Experts. Bye-bye.
Can't wait to see where your vibes and your work bring you next.
Super excited for you, for your next move. We're all going to miss you at Mixture of Experts.
Go do amazing things. Congratulations, Alex. Thank you for everything and good luck.
Best wishes on your next adventure.
See you soon and so long for now.
Thank you so much and best of luck in your next role.